Today, the FOMC decided to leave our policy rate unchanged. We see the current stance of monetary policy as appropriate to promote progress toward our maximum employment and 2% inflation goals.
There's been some debate about whether the Fed should look through the inflation that will come from higher oil prices stemming from the Middle East conflict. Is that the right approach at this juncture? And to what extent does the fact that inflation has been above target for roughly 5 years now influence the committee's thinking around this?
So, first, let me say we're well aware of the performance of inflation over the last few years and how a series of shocks have interrupted progress that we've made over time. And that happened most recently with tariffs, and now there will be some effects on inflation coming forward. The thing that's really important that we see this year is progress on inflation through a reduction in goods inflation as the one-time effects on prices of tariffs go through the system, go through the economy. That's the main thing we're looking for going into this exercise. And we need to be seeing that to sort of understand that we actually are making progress, because on net we didn't make progress. And if you look at total core inflation, it's about 3%, and some big chunk of that, between 1/2 and 3/4, is actually tariffs. So we're looking for progress on that.
In December, we saw employment numbers revised down to negative 17,000. January revised down. February posted a loss of 92,000. Is the employment side a far greater risk than the inflation side? Because we are seeing inflation, CPI is close to 2%. PCE has ticked down overall.
You know, it's really, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that that's clear at all, that one is more at risk than the other. So you can point to the unemployment rate being stable, and, you know, in a world where both supply and demand for workers have come down very, very sharply over the course of the past year due to immigration policy largely, you know, a ratio is going to be a better thing to look at than job creation, for example. So, and the ratio is the unemployment rate, and it's been stable since September. So that tells you that. Inflation, you know, you can we're at 3.0% core inflation, 2.8% headline. So we've been well above the 2%, that amount, whatever it is, 0.7, 0.8, or a full percentage point above 2% for some time, and that's a concern. You know, we need to get back down to 2%.
What happens if there's no Federal Reserve chairman confirmed on May 15th? Would you stay on?
So if my successor is not confirmed by the end of my term as chair, I would serve as chair pro tem until he is confirmed. That is what the law calls for. That's what we've done on several occasions, including involving me, and it's what we're going to do in this situation. And while I'm at it, on the question whether I will leave while the investigation is ongoing, I have no intention of leaving the board until the investigation is well and truly over, with transparency and finality, and I would refer you to the statement that was in the Fed's brief that you all have seen, and I won't have anything more for you on that. On the question of whether I will then continue to serve as a governor after my term ends and after the investigation is over, I have not made that decision yet, and I will make that decision based on what I think is best for the institution and for the people we serve. Figuring you probably were going to set the dominoes off there, Edward. And I'm not going to have any more to say on those issues, by the way.
The economy's experienced a series of supply shocks in the last few years, COVID, tariffs, 2 oil price shocks. Do you think that is bad luck, or has something changed in the world that makes supply shocks more common, and does the central bank need to start taking account of the risk of supply shocks as a more common problem?
You know, we did go through a long period where the shocks were all demand shocks, and you know, so we've had a lot of practice thinking about supply shocks in the last 4 or 5 years, for sure. And it's just a very different thing, and a much more difficult thing, because it does immediately raise the question of tension between the two parts of our mandate. But, you know, has the world changed? I mean, COVID is a one-time thing, right? This energy supply shock is a one-time thing. It's not because of some broad tendency or anything, I don't think. And you know, the oil shock with Ukraine was also a consequence of military action. So I don't know that the world has changed in a way that there'll be more supply shocks. But, there's people have written that paper and that speech a number of times. A number of people have tried to make the case that is the case. And in fact, we have seen more supply shocks in the last 5 years than we've seen in many years before that. It's a fact.
How high would oil prices and broader inflation have to go, and for how long for the committee to consider hiking rates? And then secondly, diesel prices are rising faster than gas prices. How concerned are you that the increase in diesel might drive up food and goods prices and lead to broader inflation?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you an example or specific answer on the first question. We're prepared to do what needs to be done, but I wouldn't want to hypothesize about what that might be. I think it's a more general concern than that. It's diesel prices because that's transportation of food and things like that. There are just lots of ways that oil and derivatives of oil get into the production and transportation of many, many things. So, and those, there are big effects in headline inflation, but things like that leak into core as well. And the effects may not be as big, but they're quite real and they're material. So we are aware of that and we're watching it, but we're right at the beginning of this, and we don't know how big we just don't know how big this will be and how long it lasts. It may or may not be something that really makes a big imprint on the U.S. economy. We're just going to have to wait and see.